Hello, let's do some practice questions for Chapter 20, the measurement of national income. All right, first we have a few practice multiple choice. So take a look at this one. To calculate GDP, gross domestic product, from the expenditure side, one must add together which of these? Okay, so remember there are two ways to calculate GDP. Well, there are really three ways, the value-added method, but the two main ways that we talk about are the expenditure method and the income method. So the expenditure approach to GDP calculates the value of all the final goods that have been produced in putting them into different categories. So what are those categories? So there are four categories. Each one of these has four, but the answer is D. So the four categories are consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. Okay, so consumption is done by households. That can be durable, semi-durable, non-durable goods or services. Investment is primarily done by firms, but also some investment is done by households. So the investment that's done by firms is business fixed capital investments, so new buildings, new factories, and new equipment, new machinery. Also, what's done by firms is changes in inventories. So inventories are goods in process or goods that have been produced but not sold yet. So it's as though the firm is investing in itself until the point at which it sells those goods to the final consumer. There is some part of investment that's done by households, and that is the purchase of new houses and apartments. Okay, so those are considered investment because they last for decades and they do yield. So here's the thing about investment from the point of view of a firm. A firm buys machinery because it can use that machinery to produce more goods in the future. A house is really the same thing for a family, for a household. People buy a house because then it yields a stream of services month after month, year after year into the future. So it's, investment is basically things that are used to produce other things. So firms build factories in order to produce more goods. Households buy houses and apartments in order to get more services, housing services in the future. Okay, government purchases. So this is not, you notice we always use the word purchases, not spending. So the government buys a lot of things, or spends money on a lot of things that are not part of GDP, like transfer payments, subsidized student loans, employment insurance, social assistance. These things are not part of GDP because there's no good or service being produced on the other side. Government purchases refers to purchases of goods and services. So when the government spends money on healthcare, then healthcare services are being produced. So there is a service that's being produced, and that is part of GDP. And then finally, we have net exports. So you notice D and E, these options were quite similar because it's net exports versus exports. So what is net exports here? Net exports are exports minus imports, right? When we use the word net, that means we're subtracting something, and what we're subtracting here are imports. So why are we subtracting imports? Because any one of these previous categories could have had some imported components. One of the items of semi-durable goods and consumption would be clothing. Now, I guarantee you, if you look at the tags on your clothing, it wasn't made in Canada for the most part. Okay, so when you bought that, it had to go into consumption by a Canadian, but it should not go to increase Canadian GDP because those items of clothing were not produced in Canada. So they end up being subtracted out of net exports, okay, and then there's no net effect on GDP. And they're being subtracted because they're imported goods. Okay. Here's the next one. Historically, nominal GDP has increased faster than real GDP because why? All right, so remember nominal GDP is GDP evaluated at current year prices, and real GDP is GDP evaluated at base year prices. And we also calculated this thing called the GDP deflator, which is a measure of prices, which is nominal GDP over real GDP. And then I can rearrange this formula here and get nominal GDP by itself and by multiplying both sides by real GDP. Okay, so that would be real GDP times the GDP deflator. So we can see that if nominal GDP goes up, it means that, well, the right side of this equation goes up, but we don't know which one. Okay, so it could be that real GDP is going up, we're producing more goods and services, or it could be that the GDP deflator is going up and we just have higher prices for the goods and services that we produce. Okay, now in actuality, both of those things are true. So in Canada, over time, nominal GDP has gone up, both because of increasing real GDP and because of increases in prices, increases in the GDP deflator. So historically, and that would indicate for pretty much all countries, but particularly for Canada, nominal GDP has increased faster than real GDP because the price level has increased. Okay, it has nothing to do with exports and imports. The price level is certainly not fallen, and it's not because of if there are improvements in product quality, then that would tend to be reflected in prices. Okay, so the general price level has increased, and that means that, so if the GDP deflator has increased, then that means whatever change there is in real GDP, we'll see actually is a bigger change in nominal GDP because we have both of those things going on. We have an increase in quantities and an increase in prices. And here's the third one. Which of the following is excluded from GDP? So it's not part of GDP. All right, so there's only going to be one that's excluded. So let's look at each one of these. A says the labor services provided by a police officer in the narcotics squad. Okay, well, the police, that's paid for by the government. So that's a government purchase. So that would be part of the G, C plus I plus G plus net exports. So that's the G in GDP. The purchase of new computers by a police department. Oh, I see a theme here. That would also be government spending. The repairs to a police car after damage as a result of a high-speed chase. That would also be government spending. The labor supplied by a lawyer to defend a suspect charged with a criminal offense. Okay, well, that would be legal services that would come under consumption. All right, assuming that it's not paid for. This isn't a public defender paid for by the government. Presumably, if this is paid for by the suspect, him or herself, then that would be part of consumption. But in any case, it is part of GDP. All right, so the final one has to be the one that's excluded. The purchase price of illegal drugs sold by a drug dealer. All right, so if something is illegal, then it's not being captured by GDP statistics. So the drug dealer has no incentive to tell the Canada Revenue Agency what they've been earning for selling drugs, and neither would this end up being reported to Statistics Canada. So if we think of GDP as a measure of economic activity, it's incomplete because it does not include things. I mean, this is economic activity, right? There's a good or a service that's being good and service that are being provided here, and that's not captured by our statistics. So this is kind of the interesting thing in the market that we're seeing right now in Canada, that what used to be illegal, namely cannabis, is now legal. So something that was not part of GDP is now going into GDP. Now it's not going to be a huge impact, but it is interesting to see this change. All right, and here's the practice short answer. The table below shows data for real and nominal GDP for a hypothetical economy over several years. So you're given nominal and real, and then question 1 asks you to compute the GDP deflator for each year. So the GDP deflator, remember, is nominal GDP divided by real GDP. And because it's an index, we do multiply by 100. So it's equal to 100 in the base year. And then, it's always relative to that. Okay, so in 2011, then, so nominal 775.3 divided by real 798.4 times 100 is equal to 97.1. All right, now you may say, wait a minute, did I do that wrong? It's less than 100. No, you did that right, because the base year, we can see in real GDP here, we're told the base year is 2013, right? Because real GDP is measured in 2013 dollars. So it's in 2013, then the GDP deflator will be equal to 100, but then in earlier years, it will be less than 100, assuming that prices are going up. All right, for 2012, nominal over real times 100. This one turns out also to be 97.1. 2013, it's the base year. We don't even really have to do the calculation, but clearly 862.9 divided by 862.9 is 1 times 100 equals 100. Okay? And the remainder of these, let me just put the answer, and then you can solve the calculation yourself, convince yourself that I've done it right. If I haven't, I'm sure you will let me know. Okay. Now, the second question here says, compute the total percentage change in nominal GDP over this whole period from 2011 to 2016. So not the annual change, just the total change. And then how much was due to changes in prices and how much was due to changes in quantities. So in other words, how much was due to changes in the GDP deflator and how much was due to changes in real GDP. Okay, so let's take a look. Nominal GDP went from 775.3 to 998.8. Okay, so the percentage change in nominal GDP over this whole period is 998.8 minus 775.3. So that's the change. To put in percentage terms, we divide by where we started, 775.3, and then we multiply by 100 to put it into percent. So that ends up at 28.8%. So that's the percentage change in nominal GDP over the entire period. So we're not looking year by year, but over the whole period. Now, how much was due to changes in prices and how much was due to changes in quantities? So let's look at the percentage change in real GDP and the percentage change in the GDP deflator. So where's real GDP? Real GDP has gone from 798.4 to 950.5. Okay, so 950.5 minus 798.4, so that's the change. To make it a percentage change, we divide by where we started. And I got 19.1%. Now you might think that the percentage change in the GDP deflator would just be the percentage change in nominal GDP minus the percentage change in real GDP. But unfortunately, percentage changes are a little weird and it doesn't actually add up precisely. So you do actually have to do the calculation. If you've done enough practice problems in the study plan in my Econ Lab, you will have figured this out. All right, what's the percentage change in the GDP deflator? It goes from 97.1 to 105.1. Okay, so 105.1 minus 97.1 divided by 97.1. times 100 is 8.2%. Okay, so we can't just add up these two and get the change, the percentage change in nominal GDP. However, we get the general idea here, right? Clearly they're related. So notice that most of the change in nominal GDP is due to changes in real GDP, right? Probably like 2/3. So 2/3 of this change in nominal GDP is due to changes in real GDP, in quantities, in other words, and about 1/3 is due to changes in prices. All right, that's it. See you later.